afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Fish and Rice Stories from Japan. I'm Toby.
I'm Andre.
And today we have our very first guest on the podcast, Charley.
Didn't realize I was the first. Hi, I'm Charley.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for taking the time.
Yeah.
And we wanted to talk to you today about a few things related to job hunting in Japan and how is it maybe from the company's perspective. But before that, can you maybe introduce yourself a little bit, where you're from and what have you been doing the past few years in Japan?
Sure. So my name's Charley. I'm from the United States originally. At Zen Group here, I'm actually working as the leader of the recruiting team. I've been here at Zen Group for about 2.5 years now, I think that's right. 2 years and 5 or so months. Before that, I was working at startups and ran my own recruiting company with a friend for about 1.5 years. Before that, I've been a salesman and just sort of rolling around the Osaka startup scene.
Always in Osaka?
Always in Osaka. A little bit in Kobe. I originally came as a grantee for a fellowship, and they had me in Kobe. But once that was over, I moved right to Osaka and sort of haven't left yet.
How long have you lived in Osaka?
In Osaka, I've probably been here for, I think, 6 years, might be 7 years coming up soon.
Yeah, it's a nice place to live, huh? And a nice place where a lot of people may want to settle and find a job, right?
Yeah.
So that leads up perfectly to our topic today of the hiring scene here in Japan and especially Osaka, where a lot of people may want to settle. Sure. From your perspective and your experience, what are some of the main challenges faced by the international community when looking for jobs here in Japan?
Sure. So I think there's a lot of basic level ones that are pretty easy to understand. Then there are some specific ones to Osaka. So just to start with, in general, for the international community, one of the big issues is going to be Japanese level. Even myself, having lived here for 7 or 8 years and having a pretty high standard of Japanese level, it can be hard to find companies that are willing to hire someone who's not a native speaker. And really, no matter how good you get at Japanese, native speakers are preferred in many places, which is often not required for the actual work, but can still be something that they're looking for. So that's one thing. Another difficulty is jobs that actually interest you, right? So I feel like at some point we're talking about English teaching.
Yes.
But what you'll see is that there's a lot of entry level positions and a lot of starting level positions at a lot of different companies, and not a ton of room for growth. So not just finding the job, but finding one where you can grow and where you can increase your status and sort of grow your actual sphere of control for work. For Osaka, the big difficulty is just we're not quite as international as Tokyo over here. So,
true.
As much as I love it, the number of companies with international headquarters that are here in Osaka is much lower than Tokyo. The number of companies that have, for example, international branches is going to be lower than Tokyo. And, there's just a little bit of not pushback, but hesitancy about hiring non-Japanese people at jobs here. Of course, there are exceptions. There are some companies. Should I say company names?
Of course you can.
We here at Zen Group obviously hire a ton of non-Japanese people. We work together. We're from 30 different countries, so we're pretty international as it goes. There are big names like Procter & Gamble over in Kobe that have a lot of non-Japanese and really non-Japanese speakers in their company as well. As well as a bunch of different smaller industries and smaller companies that have, big headcounts for non-Japanese natives. But, the difficulty can be finding those companies and if there's an opening and if there's something that you want to do, right? So you sort of have to get a little lucky on that end.
So one of the first points you mentioned, though, was something that a lot of people are often thinking about, the level of Japanese language, right? One may read on a lot of forums, a lot of companies ask for at least JLPT level N2.
Yeah.
Some may even require N1, and others may not require anything at all. To mind comes a lot of these programming jobs that are really in high demand by companies in Japan. Do you feel like companies are really not willing to compromise on Japanese level? And if so, why would you think that is?
I think the difficulty is that if you don't have the Japanese level to speak N2, if you're at N3 or N4 or even N5, it's going to be hard to negotiate in any sense. You will need someone in between or a company that speaks fluent English. So that's, one big hurdle. I will say that the JLPT itself is probably less important than your actual ability to speak. I myself only have N2. There are plenty of people that I know who only have N3 or N4 but speak perfectly. And for whatever reason, whether it's writing or it's just not wanting to take the test again, not having a higher level. So I would say, if you want a business job, if you want a job in the back office somewhere or on a sales position, you're probably going to need around N2 actual skill. But I wouldn't say that you have to have the JLPT paper. Some companies will require it, and some companies will use it as a way to sort of slash applications. You get it if you're getting 100 applications a day.
Yes.
You got to use something to sort of sift through them. But if you're at that actual level of skill, it is possible to get into those companies. And I myself have done that. I mean, I've worked at companies that wanted N1 or only expected someone who spoke Japanese and took me because I was able to work my way through the interviews.
Would it be easier to find a job while being able to speak Japanese better than write? Let's say you have N3 or vice versa, if you have N1 but not able to speak that well.
I mean, that's going to be based on the job. But yeah, if you have an N1, which, we see lots of people who have perfect writing scores on their JLPTs and can't really talk. If they have an interview in Japanese, they're sunk. I mean, there's nothing you can really do if you go into an interview room and they're asking you to speak Japanese and you can't answer the questions, right?
From your own experience in recruiting and going through a lot of interviews, does this happen a lot? People that kind of overpromise on their Japanese level and then underdeliver during their interview?
I want to try to avoid saying a lot. People are, trying their hardest.
It happens.
And yes, it definitely happens. We have people in here who promise that they're fluent and probably have lower than conversational. We have people who come in with an N1 and, have a lot of trouble. And on the flip side, we do have people who come in with an N3 and, they blow the interview out of the water because they're really good speakers and they're really good sort of conversationalists, but their kanji recall is not so great, and that ends up being the problem for them, right?
So now you personally, or as a recruiter here in Japan and HR leader, when you recruit applicants, what is it that you are looking for? Now we work in an international company here, as we mentioned before, so the common communication language mostly is English, but you will pay attention to the Japanese level for some positions, but besides that, what is important for you when hiring?
Sure. So leaving the language to the side for a second?
Yes.
Okay. I think for me, here at Zen Group, so we get a ton of applications. And that's not just me saying oh, look at us, we're, so popular. A lot of applications come through. Many of them are not very serious. They're people who, have their cover letter that says, I really want to be an English teacher, so please hire me at your school. When applying for a job in marketing, right? So I think for me, honestly, the biggest thing to see besides those language abilities or very basic skill level stuff, you have to have this many years of experience, is going to be actually caring about the job or even caring about the application. If you don't have the Japanese level and it's a Japanese required job, or, for example, the English level and it's an English required job, I'm not going to take time to look at the cover letter so much, but if you're telling me that you speak great English, you don't have the scores, but you're really interested in the job, you clearly read the actual page, you know what you're looking for, you know what you want to do, I will definitely give it an extra look, right? So if you care enough to really try on the application, I'm much more likely to actually move you through the process, even if things are looking a little dicey on the actual experience side of things. If we say we want business English and you say I have conversational, but you clearly read through everything and your cover letter is well formatted and
you're applying for the position because you want the position,
exactly,
right?
And I think this is gonna probably come up, but we get tons of people who clearly don't care. I'm sure they're fine people. I'm sure they really want to stay in Japan, but people who are in English teaching and they don't want to be in English teaching, and that's all they are trying to do, right? Get out of there. So just give me whatever job it is. I'm not going to write a cover letter. I'm not going to edit anything. My application is 4 years old and hasn't been updated.
And these kind of applications usually just get rejected before even being considered for the position.
Yeah. I mean, if they have all the basic skills, I might give it a second look. But generally, if it's clear to me that you don't care enough to have read the job description, it doesn't take up too much time in my mind.
And so what would you consider then a success when you hire someone for the company? How would you define, this was a successful hire in the maybe short, medium to long term?
Sure. I think the most obvious ones are going to be KPIs, so business goals. If you have so much overtime happening in a certain team, let's say 10 hours a month per person. This new person coming in drops that to 2 hours. That's great, right? That's a very clear data point that we can look at. But not everything's data, and more importantly, a big part of the hiring game is, not numerical in that sense. So for me, what I'm looking for is people who are engaged, who are interested in working here, and who like working here. It means a lot to me when I see someone come in and make friends, right? Of course, if they're making friends and not doing their work, that's a different issue. But, if someone comes in and they, immediately get along with everyone in the office and they're doing a good enough job, they're doing well at their job, I'm really happy, and that's a success for me.
So in a sense, it's about the culture fit,
right?
Fitting into the corporate culture.
Right. And, of course, I can't put numbers all the way to the side, but if we get someone in here who's really great at their job, but is getting into fights every day and arguing with everyone around them and makes the office a terrible place to be, that's going to be much worse for us than someone who, does fine, does all their work, gets on time, but, keeps everyone positive and keeps working hard with everyone to make sure that things, keep happening.
So to give some context and to kind of re-mention what you said earlier about our company being very international, right? It's a startup. We have people from all kinds of different backgrounds. It's a very unique environment maybe here in Japan. Right. And for this kind of environment, what's important for you when you hire someone is to find someone that, of course, fills the needs for the position, but that has the culture fit to kind of work with everyone.
Absolutely.
In your previous experiences, maybe recruiting for more traditional Japanese companies or more long-established big corporations, would you say this is also what they're looking for?
The thoughts about company culture are relatively new in Japanese hiring. Of course, there's always been HR branding and hiring branding going on, but the sort of big push to have, SNS presence, have Facebook pages, Instagram pages, have people who talk about your company is relatively on the newer side. I would say that it's definitely more sort of towards newer companies like us here at Zen Group. We're exceptionally international in a way that you don't see often anywhere in Japan. I think, don't quote me on the exact number, but we hire like 2% of all the Lithuanians living in Japan with a working visa.
Wow.
Or it's either 2 or 0.2%. Regardless, we have a lot of these super international positions that are not things you see in Osaka, definitely, but even in Tokyo, are not very often seen. So for us, culture is a huge part of it. If we're working with someone who's coming from a really exceptionally Japanese background with, really rigid company structure and real strong expectations that are very much sort of the Japanese working culture side of things, they're gonna not like it here, right?
Yes, it's possible.
They're great people and there's nothing wrong with that working environment, but the expectations that they're gonna have coming into work here is that someone's gonna have, lists of things for them to do, and it's going to be very structured. And for better and for worse, and what I tell people in the interviews is, we're not so structured, right? You come in on Monday and something is 180 degrees changed by Wednesday, right?
That happens, yeah. It does.
Which
have to
can
adapt, be flexible.
Yeah, which can be super frustrating, right? Like, I definitely get frustrated from time to time with that sort of thing, but at the same time, it's a reality, right? It's like, it's who we are. And, if we can't find someone who's going to be cool with that, what's going to end up happening is we hire them, they have a terrible time, their resume is hurt. Before anything about us, they spend all this time and effort to switch jobs, and then they show up and it's the worst thing in the world for them, and then they have to leave. It's a huge amount of stress for them. And then we also need to hire someone new again, which is not good for either of us. So that culture fit is really quite important.
And so for traditional companies, they might be looking more for a very specific set of skills. Can you complete the tasks of this job we are recruiting for, and that's about it? They will not necessarily expect you to be generating a very positive atmosphere in the office. Of course, you have to get along with your colleagues. This is a basic understanding, I think. But they're not necessarily going to look so much as the culture fit. Are you going to fit into this working culture? More as in they will focus on, can you get the job done?
Yeah, I think that's fair. And additionally, of course, there's always going to be, we don't want to hire a jerk. No one wants to hire a jerk. Jerks are, worse than anything else. But you also have the issue of many Japanese workplaces expect you to conform to them, which is something that we don't do so much. We're big on freedom here, so if you want to come to work in a t-shirt and slippers, that's totally cool as long as it doesn't get in the way of your work, right? In most Japanese workplaces, especially traditional ones, there was a while where I was hiring for ryokan, so like Japanese inns out in the countryside, and they're looking for. First of all, they're looking for Japanese people because they prefer Japanese people. But if they're going to hire a foreigner, every time we'd hire someone for them, they would come to us with complaints about, oh, well, he doesn't have, a notepad on him when he comes to work every morning, ready to copy down everything everyone says. And, these little cultural things that there's no way he's going to, the person we introduce, he or she is going to know right off the bat, or they're going to know right off the bat. And there's just this much stronger expectation, especially from traditional companies and traditional industries like those that just say, you really have to match what they want from you. And I met some really cool non-Japanese people in those jobs. I met a guy from Pakistan who had been working at a ryokan out in Hyogo-ken, so Hyogo Prefecture, for like 16 years.
Wow, that's a long time.
Yeah, and he was 100% integrated. I mean, he was like, Pakistani guy, not looking like your average Japanese ryokan worker, right?
Yeah, I can imagine.
I think he was also like 187 centimeters, so like also a big dude.
Okay.
But he, had completely integrated himself into that lifestyle. And, I would see him laughing and joking with the customers and being very polite with some of the older customers in ways that, is really what ends up being required from places like that, right? Unfortunately, they're not looking for you to bring a new what would you say, like a new sort of outlook on their jobs. It's a much older industry, and they're looking for people to come join them on their side of the fence, right?
So within these companies that you mentioned that are a bit more strict,
Sure.
There's this limit that some companies kind of cross, and then they become labeled as black companies, kurokaisha, right?
Black Kigo.
Black kigyo. So black companies, meaning these companies have a very bad reputation for managing their internal human resources and how they treat their personnel.
Right.
So is there like a limit? Is this an official term? And how can you find these companies before applying to avoid them and not get yourself into trouble?
Sure. So on the definition side, I mean, there are symbolic issues with companies that make them black kigyo, right? So, and there's everything from black kigyo, grey kigyo, and then white kigyo.
Okay.
Which, it's just internet speak of just sort of moving the dial a little bit here and there. But, for
labeling all of them.
Exactly, yeah. So for like black kigyo, you're looking mostly at companies that have, outstanding issues with compliance. So you have harassment that goes on in the office. Not necessarily sexual, but also, power harassment. You have, distinct issues with discrimination, whether it's gender discrimination. So you will have some of these, stereotypically burakigyo, right? That, if you're a woman, they will not hire you into a position that they consider something that needs to be long-term. So those are two. Other areas are things like not being paid your overtime. So, obviously, there are laws in Japan that require that you get paid your overtime money, right? You work extra hours, you make extra pay. There are companies in Japan that do something called kote zangyo. There's a lot of them, where essentially they prepay you for overtime and then don't really keep track of it so much after that.
So they every month they will increase your salary by, let's say, 5,000 yen. This is going to be considered your overtime pay, regardless of how much overtime you actually do.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little more involved. They have to tell you how many hours worth of overtime it is. And I've worked in one of those places, and if you want to hear some Burakigyo stories, I'd be happy to tell you. But so, issues with payment on that front, you tend to see a very, very high resignation rate at companies that are like true burakigyo. So yeah, on the definition, there's no super strong, this is what everyone wants definition. I'm sure there's one in the dictionary you can look up. But in terms of, how to identify them and how to avoid them, it's going to depend on your level of Japanese, right? So if you are a prolific Japanese reader and Japanese speaker, there are plenty of sites online that do reviews, right? So in the West, we would probably look at the site Glassdoor.
Yes.
There are sites here in Japan, like one called Enhyoban or Enlighthouse, where you can look up Japanese companies and look at what their employees are saying about them, right? And you will, see people talking about things like, the kote zangyo, like my prepaid overtime is, 40 hours, but I'm really doing 80 hours a month, and I'm not seeing that.
Not getting paid for that.
Or, there's very specifically portions of that website that are like, what is it like to work here as a woman? And you might see something like, it's really easy to work here as a woman. It's very easy to take your time off. There are no problems. My boss is a woman, so it's easy to speak with her. Or, the opposite of that. You will sometimes see like, I had a kid and they got rid of my position while I was away, and now I don't have a job. So those are good places to look. The difficulty there is, of course, you really have to read Japanese or be really good with Google Translate to get through those.
To get through all the websites.
Other places to look at, you can look on Twitter. Twitter
is very big in Japan. Huh?
Yes, Twitter is, I think it is probably the second biggest or third biggest.
After Instagram, I wouldn't be surprised. This is where a lot of people just discuss, vent, share information about pretty much everything.
Yeah.
And, well, the most loved topics are probably politics and work-related kind of scandals.
Entertainment stuff too. Yeah. I would say Twitter is a great place to go for this sort of thing. There's an account on there. I forget what it's called exactly, but it's an account that gives out an award every year for the worst borakigyo.
Okay.
I haven't seen them in a couple of years. Maybe they've been off.
They stopped. Yeah.
But they are. They're there talking about the worst companies to work at. So that's another good place to go. You can see a lot of feedback on companies like that. How to avoid them, that's the real question, right? So I, won't name names, but I spent time as a salesman in a Japanese company for about a year and a half. And I was doing about 100 hours of overtime a month,
that's
unpaid.
A lot.
100 hours.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
I was doing that like super stereotypical. You might even see it in dramas. Like, I'm in the office at 7 a.m. and I'm out of the office at like 11:30 or midnight. Sometimes I'm like sleeping in the office just to
sleeping even.
Yeah, sleeping on the couch in the office.
Was it required? Did somebody tell you to do that?
It wasn't required, but it was sort of like I have these numbers. I have this KPI that I have to hit. And of course, I'm the American in the office who can speak English fluently. So, you're in charge of calling America and you got to hit this many calls in a day.
And they only wake up when you're technically supposed to finish.
East Coast wakes up 13 hours before or after us. Then, West Coast, it's getting even later. So, I mean, I was going into work right at 9 a.m. because that's when everyone went into work. And that's part of the inflexibility that you expect to see in a borakigyo, right? What they could have said to me is, hey, you're doing phone calls in the middle of the night now, so why don't you come in at 5 p.m. and leave at in the morning, right? Midnight or early in the morning. Of course, then there's no trains, so that's a different problem. But it's not that. It's, okay, so this is what you have to do. It is physically impossible for you to do it during normal business hours, but figure it out, and don't you dare miss any of those numbers.
So Black Kigyo, we could do a full-on podcast episode about this, but for now,
sure.
We would recommend you listener, if you are part of this podcast episode, stay away from them, do your research before applying, and look for something else.
Absolutely.
So when looking for something else now, generally speaking, how would you say is the job market situation in Japan?
It is crazy right now. So, in general, through Corona, obviously. So, right, we've all been living with COVID for the last 3 years. Hopefully not with COVID, but in the era of. And there's been a huge freeze on hiring all over the country. And now with the Japanese government moving to have COVID move to the same level as the flu.
The flu, yes.
In the
which is very recent, only a couple of weeks ago from the time we are recording this episode.
Exactly. So, that move has started to change things. Foreign visitors are starting to come back. So you have these massive industries like hotels and travel companies that are just starting to reawaken and start putting their job posts out. And so it's starting to get a little nuts, especially for foreigners, especially for those who speak English. Even if it's a Japanese person who speaks English, those jobs are starting to reappear and in force. So that's pretty big. And, I don't know if people still think of Japan as the super high-tech country, but it's not really so high-tech, all things considered. I don't know if anyone else on this podcast has used a fax machine in their lives.
No, I have not.
Yeah, many late nights at that sales company running the fax machine.
Send this fax over. This is a fax number. Yeah.
Well, the best part is sending the fax, then calling to make sure that they got the fax, because you can't just assume that things arrive. Anyway.
When all of this could have been done by email.
Yeah. One email.
One email and it's all done.
Like send receipts and we're done. I could just line it to you. No, so, things are starting to get a little heated here in the job market. Lots of opportunities coming up. You're starting to see more travel jobs. You're starting to see more jobs in IT, especially DX, what we call like the digital transformation. So you're seeing companies that previously would never have considered someone who doesn't speak Japanese say, screw it, just get us somebody, right?
Because they don't have enough internal talent, or why?
There's, there are huge problems with the Japanese job market. Japan has a declining population, right? Declining population, not great parity for men and women in the workplace. So, they're starting on the back foot already and then adding onto these things like, very high skill jobs that are difficult to get, like programming jobs, jobs that require like true technical skills. And so that's, causing issues. So what we're seeing now is, I think, for jobs like IT jobs, coding, programmers and the like, I think the last number I saw from the end of last year was a job offer to job seeker ratio of like 3.5 to 1.
Wow.
So for everyone looking for a job, there are 3.5 jobs out there.
In tech, like in programming, that's great.
Right.
For a programmer.
In the last couple of weeks, we've seen a lot of layoffs in tech. So not so great recently, but still, 3.5 to 1 is absurd. There are more jobs than you can shake a stick at. For office stuff, it gets lower, obviously, right? More people qualified means more lower ratio. I think the number right now is like 1.9, which is still huge, right? For each job seeker, there are 2 jobs.
What will you say, in your opinion, from what you've seen out there, are like the easiest jobs to get? Because programming then would be you need a lot of skills. You need to learn, and then even once you've learned programming, it's going to be specific to whatever programming language you're able to handle and the requirements of the position. But generally speaking, what would you say are like the easiest jobs to get as a foreigner coming to Japan and then going on to more complicated?
Sure. So I think the easiest, obviously, is English teaching, right? It's a job for, not even native English speakers all the time. You will see people who are not native English speakers who just have like, a 990 on their TOEIC or went to an international high school teaching English. That's definitely the easiest to get into. It's also one of those jobs that has a really tough to break ceiling, right? It can be difficult to move from English teacher to someone who runs the school because you're the English teacher who's there on a contract and they don't expect you to stay super long, right? So I'd say that that's probably the easiest level to get into. Next levels you're looking at, if you speak some Japanese, some game translation or localization style jobs. You see them a bunch for like cell phone games, right? Or things like that. Customer support stuff. Next area, depending on your level of Japanese, depending on how big the area you're in is, travel stuff, right?
Yeah, so, tourism, quite big.
Lots of hotels, lots of travel companies that need someone to be able to, deal with Frank, the American who walks through the door.
Well, especially if you are in major locations or tourist locations. Maybe even without Japanese, you might get by at an international hotel.
Maybe not absolutely no Japanese, but if you've been here for 2 or 3 years, you've picked up enough to sort of say, hold on, I'm going to go get my manager, I'll be right back, and then run away. So I think travel is probably the next level that you're looking at. Maybe the translation comes above travel just because, you're looking at harder sentences to deal with and you really have to deal with them. You can't slide them off to the side. So travel is another good one. There are much more difficult jobs. A lot of office jobs, sales jobs can be quite difficult to get into if you're not Japanese. I would say probably the hardest ones are the ones that really require not just an understanding of the language, but also the culture and things like that. And consulting, legal, things like that. Another interesting one, I don't know where it would fit in my hierarchy, but recruiting jobs actually are pretty good for non-Japanese speakers. If you can get into one of these jobs at one of the big recruiting firms, there are a bunch of them, they're all over the place. They have like 500 employees in the country per company, and they're always looking for new people. So that's definitely something I recommend to people who apply here and maybe don't exactly match what we're looking for, but they want to be in HR, but we just don't know the spots for them.
Interesting.
We'll have those discussions sometimes, yeah.
So what kind of position are you mostly recruiting for here at Zen Group?
Sure. So for us, it's a lot of different things all at once. Very busy, very flexible, but Customer support jobs are always open for us. We always have something hiring. The difficulties there is, you have to have pretty good Japanese. So Japanese and English, and if you speak a third language, that's even better. Besides that, we've got marketing jobs open, some requiring some experience, some requiring no experience, but those are relatively light on the Japanese requirements. As long as you can sort of type a little bit and you're able to Google things, you should be fine. And then, for truly non-Japanese jobs, you're looking at like finance or accounting or, secretarial work and things like that, shipping and, international export work.
Logistics, yeah. They would require like fluent Japanese level and be able to manage a lot of
Are there
things.
any openings right now that you could
Yeah,
say?
we have a lot. I think I would actually probably be better served giving you the link rather than actually just listing them
We
off.
can
'Cause
put
could
it
be
in
here
the show
forever.
description.
Yeah, perfect. So we're always hiring. And one important thing to note is, even if we don't necessarily have exactly the job you're looking for, we do keep a database of people who are interested. We can't promise that we'll call everyone who gets in there, but from time to time we do have people who come in through the database rather than from the regular application route.
Overseas, something that's relatively common or has been for the last few years is just spontaneous applications.
Right.
Just, there's a company you really like, you have a specific skill set that you think would be useful for that company, and you just reach out and be like, hey, this is me, I can do this, I'd love to do this for you, and this is going to bring you these kind of benefits. Does this happen here in Japan at all?
You don't see it so much from Japanese people. I think I've seen a couple in all of my hiring experience here from a Japanese person. For foreigners, non-Japanese people, we do see it quite a bit. The difficulty there is they can be a really great person, but if I don't have something that works with their background, I do have to send them that unfortunate letter that says, hey, thank you so much for your interest, but I don't have anything for you.
So you wouldn't make a position out of thin air because that person may...
If it's a really exceptional application, we might consider it. But in general, it can be difficult to rally all the support that would be necessary to start a new branch, for example, of the company. From time to time, if it's something we sometimes search for but don't always have open, I will actually send those through. But I would say, really think about if you match what we're looking for, right? I have a funny story about a taxi driver in Egypt who promised to give me an entire year of his salary if he could get a job here. And
Okay.
But, the issue there is, thanks for the offer, bud, but it's just not going to work out, right? Like, dude didn't speak English, he didn't speak Japanese, and he was in Egypt driving a taxi every day.
So he was trying to bribe you?
Yes. I think that would be the legal term for it. I'd like it noted for the record that I did not accept, and he does not work here. But yeah, so we definitely do get spontaneous applications. I'd say feel free to send them in, but don't get upset if we don't have something for you right at that second.
Where do you get most of the applications from? In our previous episode, we talked about we can look through websites like Indeed, we can look through websites like Jobs in Japan, or even platforms like Gaijin Pod. Personally, I was saying that I have used LinkedIn quite a bit, which doesn't have the image of being so popular in Japan. What's your take on this if applicants are looking for positions?
So it depends on what you're looking for. LinkedIn is definitely bigger now than it was in years previous, but it definitely does skew towards non-Japanese companies, right? It's a relatively new platform here in Japan. It's not such a huge SNS here in Japan. The big business SNS is not really LinkedIn, as it were. I would say, if you're looking for work, Indeed is great. There's a lot of stuff on there, and it, of course, spiders the internet, so you get a lot of jobs there that may not be open right that second, but will at least get you an idea of who's hiring. Gaijin Pod, Indeed, Jobs in Japan, all great, really fantastic places to look for work. Another thing to do is to look up companies, right? So we get a ton of spontaneous applications through our homepage, through our recruiting homepage, which is perfect. It's a great way to get interested, and it does show that extra step, right? So as long as your application is complete, like you're not just sending a message that says, hey, I want work, no
Give
resume.
me work, I want a visa for staying in Japan.
Exactly.
I'm a taxi driver.
Right. And also, that first year of salary, you could just take that on your way out. But yeah, if you, supply us, or if you send us like a full completed resume and it looks like you really took time with it and it comes through to my email via the website rather than, one of the places where we're getting 800 applications and however many of them are from people who do not really care what they're applying for, it definitely does make it easier to hire you, right? So you stand out which, as much as I would like to say we don't have any sort of variation, you can apply from anywhere, it's all the same. Taking that one extra step is quite helpful. And not even just for us. Most Japanese companies will have a recruiting page, especially bigger companies will have like their own landing page that has, huge sections for mid-career and new career. And applying through those is probably the better option if you're looking to do something more spontaneous.
What about agencies?
Agencies are good. I work with a lot of agents. They're, working very hard to get people into jobs. And I, in a previous life at this point, was an agent. So I can't say that agents are necessarily bad. I will say that it's important to remember that the agent makes money on introducing you to places, and the company pays quite a bit of money to hire you.
So the company will cover the agent cost usually?
Usually. There are some sort of shady places that say, you pay me $500 and I find you a job, which definitely stay away from those. They're not necessarily above board.
And there's no guarantee.
And who knows when they're going to call you again. So yeah, I would say go with big reputable agencies, right? So there are big multinationals here in Osaka, in Tokyo, in all the major cities here in Japan that, can help you find work. They're great. It's definitely more difficult as a new graduate, right? So if you're coming in with no experience, recruiters are generally separated out by their industry, and they're really focused on, helping companies that are looking for talented people find work, right? So, if you're 2 or 3 years into your career, a little bit of what you like to do, then it might be more useful for you to contact a recruiter. If you're just coming at it from, I just got out of Japanese school, I graduated college, came to Japan, taught English for a year, left teaching, moved to a Japanese school to learn Japanese, and now I'm looking for full-time work. That can be really tough on the agent front, and the agent might not give you, their best work just because, they're trying to find people that they can reasonably introduce places, and the places that go to agents.
So if you have some experience already, a background, and some language skills, why not check out the agent? If you just come out of language school, maybe just try applying directly to companies, to jobs listed on Indeed or LinkedIn.
LinkedIn, Gaijin Pod, Indeed, Jobs in Japan, all great places. It's not even the language skills. Many of the international, specifically, recruiting agencies will have jobs that are no Japanese required or very low Japanese required. So that's definitely worth it to go talk to them. Of course, it is fewer, right? So the number of those jobs is much less than the number of jobs that will look at you if you have English and Japanese both. But, either one's fine.
So if you see an applicant now and he's preparing his CV resume, about to apply to a job that he likes, what would be some advice that you would give them, whether it's on the resume side? Should it be maybe a more modern resume to stand out like we are taught in the West, or should it be this traditional Japanese CV? And how should they approach the recruiting process and the interview process?
Sure. So in the preparation phase, I would say what's more important than just saying that there's this one specific correct mode is to ask the person preparing that application to look into what they're applying for, right? Look into what the company is like. If you look at a company and you see that it's like a very old Japanese company and does not have, a lot of IT related work, and it seems much more sort of stiff, don't go sending them, like a bright pink and, electric blue resume with like a really cool shot, like headshot of you, splashed across the top with like graffiti lettering, because they're gonna hate that. They're not here for that.
Going straight to the bin.
Right. I mean, I think it may not even get to them. They might just be like, "What is this?" And
or maybe the computer won't be able to open this file type.
Right. So I would say, go prepare for the audience they're going to, right? If you're going to a super Japanese company, you better show up to that interview in a suit. But if you're going somewhere if you're a programmer and you're applying to some place, send them your GitHub link, right? Send them that and a PDF with your information and some links to, sites
portfolio,
that you've made before, right? If you're applying for a super startup-y place, you could probably get away with the more Western style, make me stand out, complementary colors and like interesting fonts. But it's definitely more important to find the correct audience rather than to just
know where you're applying and adapt yourself to that.
In terms of for the interview process and all that, my big thing is prepare, right? You wouldn't imagine the number of people who we get in the office here who come in for an interview and say, what do you guys even do? And it's just like, thanks for coming all the way out to the office, bud. Like, I'm glad you're interested, but also, it's like a Google search in 10 minutes.
Yes. You should know what you're applying for
Right.
and where you're applying.
Right. And it's like, I'm not looking for them to look me in the eye and say, well, 6 months ago you put out a press release that said that, your sales went up by 15%. That's crazy. That's not going to happen. But, if it's clear to me that you took any time out of your day, like you're busy, you have work, you have school. I understand that you don't have time to like listen to every podcast that we've ever put out, or that you're not going to have the time to read 6 articles about us on the internet. Just open up the homepage and like look through some of our jobs and really think about your questions, right? What do you want to do? Like, where do you want to work? And ask questions that sort of line up with what you're looking for, right? If you're looking for a place that's super freewheeling and very free in terms of work culture, you should ask questions about that. And what I will say is, you shouldn't be afraid to ask those questions, but you should also remember not to be so upset if you don't get the job, right? No one wants to have rejection letters, but if you end up getting a job at one of these places you hate, and you take it just to have the visa, you have the visa, but also you're not happy.
Yeah, you're not going to enjoy your everyday life.
Right. And, no matter how good the pay is or how much the work is, if you're working 100 hours of overtime, it doesn't matter how much you're making, right? Like, you're not free time. That's 2 days a week asleep in bed every day, every week, right? So, be ready to get rejected. Be ready to get rejected for reasons that you don't get to know. Japanese companies are not big on giving you feedback.
Yeah, usually they don't even give anything. You
Right.
just get rejected, and even if you ask for, could you give me any reason so I can improve for the future, you might not hear from them again.
Ever. So, be ready to get rejected. Be ready not to know why, and, just keep trying. When I got my first job here in Japan, it was me at a computer and every job on a job site and the application button for a couple hours every night for a couple weeks. Eventually I found something that wasn't so great, and then I had to leave after a couple months because it was sort of a nightmare.
Then you have to look for something new. So it's
Yeah.
best to take the time as well to kind of do your research and know where you want to be that fits into your vision and how your vision may fit into the company's vision as well.
Exactly. And be ready to get rejected and be ready to, try again, right? There are plenty of companies that will not necessarily reject you if you apply for 2 jobs in the same month. But try not to take it too personal. I know it's impossible. I know that every rejection feels like a personal slight.
It's difficult, but you have to keep going. And from the company's perspective too, right? Sometimes they may want to hire 2 or 3 candidates that are very interesting for a specific position, but for budget reasons, for space reasons, or for whatever reasons, they cannot hire all of them. They have to make a decision. And sometimes you may be rejected for not a bad reason, but someone was just a tiny bit better, maybe a slightly better cultural fit, as we talked about before, or has one specific skill that may be beneficial to the company.
Right. And, we try to get rid of this sort of feeling-based hiring here at Zen Group as well, but, sometimes with many companies out there, you get the hiring director on the right day. He or she is feeling great about themselves that day, and, you just have a better interview because of it. There's no way to sort of prepare for these things, and you got to do your best to make sure that they're not things that affect your outcomes. Try your hardest in every case, but just don't let it break you, because the second you let it break you, you're not going to get that job. You're not going to
you're going to give up looking for it.
Right.
How about the interviews? Another question came to mind just now. Is how many interviews are usual in a recruiting process? Is it 2, 3, sometimes 4, or?
It definitely depends on the company. It depends on the level of seniority. You're usually going to see like 2 or 3 for entry-level jobs. If you're looking at like higher positions, management, division heads, things like that, you're looking at like 4 or 5 maybe. But it's not that long of a turnaround. The difficulty there is going to be the scheduling and making sure that everything lines up. And then, of course, many companies in Japan do not get back to you right away. I mean, it's like, a month before you hear back about your interview. And then it's
even a month.
Sometimes. For us, we try to keep it in a week and often roll over into 2 weeks, unfortunately. I'm sorry.
Well, it's understandable too, right? If you have more candidates to interview, you want to at least go through all the interviews you've scheduled before you make a decision, even if the first candidate might be the one that you want. And I think we've covered quite a lot of questions.
Sure.
thank you, Charlie, for taking the time. There's just one more little thing. If
Okay.
you have 5 more minutes,
Okay.
Andrew prepared a little trivia for
boy.
you.
Trivia.
To
Trivia
see,
about what? That's worrying.
trivia about numbers in Japan.
Numbers?
Regarding to the hiring industry.
Oh, boy.
And we were
It's not
wondering.
only Japan, it's just like trivia questions about HR, and I want you to answer those questions and also kind of compete with Toby. For Toby probably will be more like a guessing game.
I'm gonna do some guessing.
10 seconds for each,
Okay.
and
Okay.
after that, one by one, you reveal.
Okay.
When was the first online job board established?
Oh my God.
A year. Give me a year. The first online job board.
I would just like to point out that just because I have no idea of any of the answers in this quiz, which is going to be clear, I still like working in HR. I promise. Don't get mad at my CEOs.
So worldwide, okay.
Worldwide, yeah,
All right,
like,
all right. I got my answer.
Okay, if you're ready,
All right.
let's start with
All
Charlie.
right. I went with 1991.
1991.
Yeah.
I
Very
put
good guess.
1997.
1997, a little bit late, I would say.
Okay.
The answer is 1992.
Oh,
Wow.
come on.
That's
Come on.
very
Yeah.
early.
No, I'm sure they had a beta version up on at least December 31st, right?
Probably, right? Maybe you're right, but the first official version that was online was on in 1992.
So early, before I was born.
1997, your guess was.
You're just too young.
Question number 2.
Okay,
Alright.
we are referring to statistics
Okay.
that is given by Glassdoor, one of the
Glassdoor?
famous websites about jobs, HR. What is the average time it takes for a company to fill in a position from start to finish, from posting to the job offer?
All right, so this is mostly
US.
North American and European data, I'm guessing?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, Glassdoor.
Average time to post a position and fill the position.
Yeah, so from the start when the
But
HR
that
starts
takes into consideration all kinds of position, right? Some of them may take
Yeah.
a long time, others may be done.
Yeah,
That's
again,
true.
average.
Average, right? Statistical average. I'm already done.
All right,
I'm gonna get this
I'm
one
done.
wrong too.
I decided.
Okay, let's start with
All
Charlie.
right, I went with 3 months.
3 months. Oh, okay.
I put 2 months.
2 months.
Was
That
it?
would
Were we
be-
supposed to give it to you in days?
It's in days, but
Okay.
So like
Yeah.
60 days.
Okay, I'm gonna go with 85 to 90 days.
okay. Glassdoor gives 42 days.
Oh, boy.
average.
All right.
42 days. Well, I think if you consider a lot of maybe high turnover jobs in the food and beverage industry that are usually hired quite fast, maybe.
yes, there are some of those probably.
All right,
Oh,
question
boy.
3.
All right.
How many
here
do we
go.
have?
I have 3. Let's go with 3.
Okay.
There is a website, Career Builder.
Career builder.
And what is the percentage of people that at least they asked for an answer that use social media to find a job? How many people responded, yes, they use social media to find a job?
So found their next job on Instagram.
Yeah, probably. Maybe Facebook.
Are people using TikTok to find work?
On
Oh, God.
TikTok, you
Am
find
I the
yourself.
old man that I thought I never would be?
I would say the younger
Yikes.
generation. I don't know who this survey was.
This
sent
survey
to.
was 2020,
Yeah,
2
but
years ago.
You have to remember,
3 years ago?
boomers are probably using Facebook to find work now. They're using it for everything else. So,
Yeah.
So how many people clicked yes?
all right.
And that was online survey, to be honest, right? So-
All right. I gave my answer.
All right, I got mine.
I got
Okay,
All right.
Charlie?
I went with 62.7%. If I got that on the nose, I'm just going to run out of
very
here.
specific. I left mine at 20%.
20%. According to Career Builder, it's 70%.
Oh, come
Wow.
on. 62.7. I'm right there.
70% of people are looking for jobs on social
You
media.
can't sleep on TikTok jobs.
Oh,
Maybe LinkedIn?
Well, how does it
you know
work?
what? I guess LinkedIn might count as an SNS.
Yeah,
LinkedIn
it's
count. If LinkedIn
Social
counts. yeah.
Facebook, Instagram.
I'm just saying.
My
I'm just
image.
saying. I'm finding my
But
next job
I'm
on
just trying
TikTok
to
for
visualize
sure.
right now looking for jobs on TikTok. It's like you scroll and suddenly you have the recruiter hiring a sign like we're recruiting, we're hiring. Comment down below.
You know, I feel like I've seen that on Japanese TikTok recently.
I wouldn't be surprised. They're innovating. They're skipping the fax and
Yeah.
moving to
You
TikTok.
go straight from faxes to TikTok job ads. No in between.
Okay, thank you
Are we
very
good?
much.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we
just-
good.
just
Three
just
little
questions.
questions.
Thank you.
I'm going to call that a draw.
Yes, well, I think you got closer on all your answers. Thank you for everything. I think we got a lot of very interesting insights into the hiring world here in Japan, which is sometimes quite obscure if you're looking at from the outside, especially like you mentioned at the end. If you're looking for a job, sometimes you might get rejected. You don't know why, you don't know what the conditions are and so on. So thank you for answering, Charley.
Absolutely.
And this was today's episode of Fish and Rice. We'll be back soon with a new one, and maybe we'll have you back as a guest in the next few weeks.
Hopefully. All right.
Yeah,
See you
thank
later,
you.
guys. I'm going to go back to my desk
Thank
now.
you very
It's
much.
right over there behind the camera.
Bye.
See you later.